In this video, we look at some of the industries that used to exist in the Sussex Weald, including the glass, iron and gunpowder industries. And today I'm going to talk about Sussex Industries. So, what do we mean by industry? Anyone? Yes.
Places where they make things?
Yes, certainly places where they make things. When you hear on the news about an industry, we usually think about a factory or a big workshop. But actually, a person can be an industry. A person can be industrious. So if I said one of you was industrious, what would that mean, do you think? Someone else? Yes?
Do things that people used to do when there was the Industrial Revolution?
It could mean that, but it actually, if you're industrious, it means you're hard working. So you could even be industrious in the classroom. You could write an essay, you could be busy putting up posters around the classroom. If you were doing lots and lots of things during the day, then your teacher could say you were being industrious. You could even be industrious at home if you were helping with the cleaning up in the house, helping with the cooking. Industrious child. So actually a person can be industrious, but usually when we say an industry, usually we mean something where lots of people have come together to make things. And more than that, there's a term called heavy industry. And heavy industry usually means when there's a lot of dirt and a lot of heat. So the iron industry or the coal industry. So when I was your age, thousands of people still worked in coal mines underground, often a mile underground, really deep down, digging out coal, because people used to heat their houses with coal. But now I think there's a couple of coal mines, but it's really disappeared. So you've been studying the north of England, haven't you? So what can anyone tell me about the industry of the north of England? Yes.
The north of England has a lot of major cities.
Yeah, big cities. And what sort of things did they make up there? Or have you done that?
They make wheat.
They grow, wheat's grown all over the country, yes.
Can they make washing machines and that?
What now? Yes, that was the sort of thing they make now. Excellent, yes. But in the past, they would have made, in the north of England there was shipbuilding, and that's really disappeared. So industries change, they don't stay the same. So what was a big industry 100 years ago, giving work to thousands of people, now might not even exist. So you've learnt about the north of England and their industries, and that they had cities and they make things like washing machines. So down here, where we're living now, here in Slindon, what do you think is happening around the village? What sort of work? Yes?
Is a full thing?
Oh,
I actually don't really know.
that's all right. It's always good to try. Yes?
Farming?
Farming, exactly. It's farming, isn't there? And two basic types of farming, the growing of stuff and the keeping of animals. Sheep, cattle, the growing, someone said wheat, barley, or maybe things like cabbages. That's the sort of thing that's going on around here. And I think most people, when they think about Sussex, when they think about the South Downs, they think about farming and villages. Even though we've got big towns, probably people, when they hear the word Sussex, they think of farming and they think of fields and hills. So what I'm going to talk to you about this afternoon might be a bit of a surprise, that there was once industry in Sussex, involving quite a lot of hard work, dirty work, but they're all industries now that have disappeared. They don't exist anymore. Now, this could be this time of year, couldn't it? This is a photograph from about 100 years ago, and these two men, I don't know if you can see, they're pulling a wagon, and on the wagon are great big tree trunks, huge tree trunks that they've cut down. And can you see the trouble they're having? Even though they've got three big strong horses, they're having a real problem getting this out of the field onto the road. And what's causing the problem, do you think? Yes?
The mud?
The mud. And why would that cause a problem?
Because it's raining now, so it will make it really sticky.
Really sticky.
And make it really hard to pull the tree trunks out.
Because they're heavy, aren't they? So what's likely to happen? Yeah, go on.
The tree trunks will sink.
Sink. Yeah, exactly. They'll sink. So a long time ago, 100 years ago, really any time before we had modern roads or before we had railways, it was really difficult to get anything done in a part of Sussex called the Weald. So we're in the South Downs, which are the hills, the chalk hills, but north of here is an area of land called the Weald, and the soil there has got a lot of clay in it. So have you used clay? Do you know what clay is? Yes, you're nodding your heads. Now the thing about, big difference between clay and chalk, the hills are chalk. Now if you have some chalk and you put water on chalk, the water goes straight through it. But if you put water on clay, what happens? Yes?
The water goes around the clay?
Yeah, it doesn't sink through it. It stays on the top. And the Weald has got a lot of clay, so when you get rain, the water just stays on the top, and then the water mixes up with the clay and the soil, and it gets really sticky. And if you start pulling great big wagons across it, everything sinks. And in the old days, the roads were just mud and rock. They weren't roads like they are now, properly made roads that people repair. So it could take them a long, long time to take their wood. Now, these big tree trunks used to be cut down to make boats, to make vessels. Who's been to Portsmouth? Quite a lot of you have been to Portsmouth. And what's the famous boat that's at Portsmouth? So yes.
The Mary.
Oh yeah, the Mary Rose. Yeah, excellent. Yes, that wasn't the one I was thinking of, but that's yes.
The Titanic?
No, that's deep under the bottom of the sea, the Titanic.
Oh, this is awful.
Does anyone know? Yes, go on.
HMS Victory.
The HMS Victory. Probably the most famous boat. Most famous boat. But the Mary Rose, that was a good answer. And these boats were all made of wood. And a lot of the wood came from these forests in the Weald. Now there's a famous English writer called Daniel Defoe, who wrote a book called Robinson Crusoe. Have you heard of Robinson Crusoe? Might not have done. But it was a story about a man who was shipwrecked. And it was very famous. It's still quite famous. And Daniel Defoe, 300 years ago, travelled around the whole of England, and he wrote down what each bit of England was like so that people would know. And when he came to the Weald, he said, I've never seen such big trees, huge great oak trees, and so many are cut down to take to the Royal Dockyard at Chatham. And Chatham's in Kent, and that's where they made the boats. And he said, the trouble is, though, they cut down these big trees, they put them on wagons, and then the rain comes, and the wagons sink into the mud. And now this is astonishing. The distance, he said, from the wood to the Chatham Dockyard was 20 miles, which is about the distance from here to Brighton, or maybe Brighton's a bit further, but that sort of distance, a bit further from here than to Chichester. And he said sometimes, what do you think the longest it took for them to get the wagon to the Chatham Dockyard? What's the yes? 5 hours. They would have been happy with 5 hours. Yes?
4 days.
4 days. You're optimists. You're living in the modern world where things are quick. Go on.
10 days.
2 or 3 years.
No.
2 or 3 years. Because once the wagons sank into the mud, you think, oh, well, it stops raining eventually. But when it stopped raining and you got to the spring and the summer and all the sun came on and all that mud dried up and went solid, it was like being in concrete, and they couldn't move it then. So men had to come with picks and shovels to dig all the mud and then pull it out and lift it. And then they'd start off again, and then it would rain and then it would sink. So it took so long. And just imagine if you were trying to go around the countryside. Today, if you wanted to go to Chatham, you can look it up later, how long it would take by car to get to Chatham from Slindon. I would guess if you could probably do it in 2 hours, probably. Maybe 3 hours if it's busy. But then it would just take so long. Everything was slow because of all the mud. So, sometimes horses weren't good enough. Horses weren't strong enough. So lots of people in Sussex at this time used oxen. And that would not have been unfamiliar. If you were walking around Sussex, you'd see men with oxen that were used for in fact, Daniel Defoe, the man I mentioned who wrote Robinson Crusoe, he visited Lewes. Do you all know Lewes? Have you heard of Lewes? Town in East Sussex? Well, it's not far from Brighton, Lewes. And Daniel Defoe went to Lewes, and as he was coming in, he saw a rich lady in her carriage. And most of the places Daniel Defoe went, where he saw rich people in their carriages, they were pulled by horses. But the lady coming into Lewes, her coach was pulled by oxen. And he said this wasn't done for a joke to be funny. It was done because only the oxen were strong enough to pull her coach through all the mud to take her into Lewes. Now, industry. So we know what industry is. We've talked about industry. The biggest industry in Sussex in a long time ago, and when I'm saying a long time ago, I'm talking about 500, 400, 300 years ago, was the iron industry. Now, if you go out onto the downs, as we talked about when I was here early in the year, for those of you who were here, what are the downs basically made of? What's the rock? We've mentioned it already. Someone different, yes? Chalk. And sometimes in chalk you find a hard stone, don't you? A sharp stone. And what's that called? Yes. Flint. Excellent. But if you're really observant, and you have to be really observant, you have to really look on the ground carefully, you find this very strange brown lumpy rock that looks like it might have fallen off a piece of machinery. It looks like iron. And it's called marcasite, and it's a form of iron pyrite, and so basically it's an iron stone. Now I wanted to bring one in to show you, but I couldn't find it. Somewhere at home, another time, or maybe I'll just drop it into the school. It's very interesting rock, and a lot of the old country people used to think they were meteorites, rocks that fall from space, because they're iron, in the summer they'd get hot. So when they picked them up, they thought, oh, that must have fallen from the sky. But it hadn't fallen from the sky, it had come out of the earth. But iron, so you do find iron on the downs, but you have to really look for it. And the weird thing is, what I found is when I'm looking for it, I look and look, I can't find it, and then I find one, and then I find another. Once I find one, my eye seems to have, focused in, and I find lots of them. So it's an interesting game, looking for marcasite on the South Downs. But really, it's in the Weald where you find iron. A lot more iron in the Weald, down beneath the clay. So what they used to do, I don't know if you can see this picture clearly, but these men are digging down deep into the ground, deep below the clay, until they find the iron pyrite, which is a rock which has iron in it. And they're digging it out, and they're lifting it up, and they're putting it in wagons, which may or may not have been drawn by oxen. So that was the first thing they did, to dig out the iron. But the iron stone, you can't make things out of that because it's a mixture of stone and iron. So they needed to get all the iron out of the stone. And to do that, they needed to melt it. And to do that, they needed power. Well, they didn't have electricity like we have, so they had to create power, and they did it in a very interesting way. In the Weald, you've got lots of little streams, and the streams flow everywhere. I expect if you've done a walk with your mum and dad or your friends, it's not unusual, is it, to find a little stream, maybe with a bridge over it. And so what they did is they created a dam. They built a bridge of mud and clay which stopped the stream moving forward. So if you stop the stream moving forward, what's going to happen? What's going to happen behind the stream? Yes?
So I didn't. I was just scratching my head.
No, it was your friend next to you. I was asking. Yes? Do you know?
They will build stuff behind it.
So, but what's going to happen to the water if the water can't get through because they've built a wall across? What's going to happen to the water? Yes.
It would go like. It would disappear.
Or it's the opposite of disappear. It will build up, won't it? The water in the stream can't go forward, and because it can't go forward, it builds up into a lake. And that's what they did. So if you look carefully, you can see they're letting a little bit of water out, but most of it they're backing up. And that little bit of water would come down like a waterfall. And a waterfall is powerful, isn't it? If you've ever been to a waterfall, see the power of that water crashing down. And they used that to turn wheels. So that was like electricity. That made the wheels turn, and that created power. So now this is an interesting drawing where the artist who's drawn this has imagined that we're looking inside the ironworks. So he's taken away part of the roof, so you can look in and you can see what the people in there are doing. And you can see the water. There's the water. Oh, it's so sensitive, this, isn't it? You can see the water moving along, and the water is turning that great big wheel, and that wheel is allowing them to power lots of things that they use to melt the iron. And they've got a fire going, and the fire is there melting the iron out of the rock. And they'd had bellows. Now, anyone know what bellows are? Bellows? Yes.
Lots and lots.
Lots and lots. Oh, you mean like shouting? He bellows out. Oh, I see what yes, well, that's one way of using it. But there's also a thing called a bellows. Well, perhaps how many of you've got to have real fires at home with wood or coal? So some of you. And if the fire starts to go out, do you have a little thing that you press like that, up and down, to push? No. Okay. Well,
I think these are probably modern stoves that they've got.
oh, they've probably got, wood-burning stoves. Well, that's something to... do a Google search of bellows, then you'll know... Yes.
Is it the thing with the like the thing where you step on it?
You-
little thing where you step in it, it's air inside, and then it.
You can have bellows like that. Yes, you push up and down, and it makes air come out. But these were huge bellows. They were massive. And the wheel turning round gave the energy for the bellows to work, and that pushed air into the furnace. Now, again, if you have a fire at home, even if you just blow on a log fire, it will make it burst into flames a lot more. So if you're pushing loads and loads of air in, that made the fire much hotter. And this map shows you in Sussex where all the iron industry was. So it's all up here in the north of Sussex, and it's all concentrated where there were lots of trees and lots of little streams. So the trees were cut down to burn to make fire, and the streams were used to create the ponds that they used to create the power. Now, there's two ways to melt iron out of ironstone. Two ways. There's a very old way that some people still use, even now. And this is by using charcoal. Now, can you see that man? There's like a little hill there, little mound. And it just looks like maybe it looks like a grass mound, or maybe it looks like a bonfire. But what he's done there is he'd created a lot of rocks on the ground, like a foundation. And on top of the rocks, he's put charcoal. And charcoal is wood that has been slowly burned, so it's turned black. So although it's still wood, it looks rather like coal. You can use charcoal for drawing, actually. But these were great lumps of charcoal, and so you've got the rocks, the charcoal, and then on top of that, ironstone. And then on top of that, charcoal. And then on top of that, ironstone. Like a cake, layers of charcoal and ironstone. And then he's covered it with earth. And then there's a little gap at the bottom, and he sets it on fire so that the charcoal burns. But it burns really slowly, and it probably take 2 or 3 days or longer for there to be enough heat to melt the iron out of the stone. It took a long time, and not only did it take a long time, you wouldn't have very much iron to show for it at the end. And they had to have great skill, huge skill, because they then had to turn the iron into something by banging hammers on it and making primitive moulds in the ground, often with clay. So they'd have a clay mould, they'd pour the iron in, and then as the iron set and got hot and got cold, it would get hard. But it was very primitive, and it took them a long time to do, a lot of hard work. But then they created a blast furnace. So this is the same artist I showed you earlier, where he's taken away the roof of the building so you can see inside. And look at that flame and look at that heat. And that's using lots of water power and lots of bellows, and that's creating massive heat. Really a lot of heat. And that would melt the iron very quickly, and they'd be able to melt a lot more iron than they could by the way I showed you just now. And that's real industry, isn't it? That's just like what we call the Industrial Revolution in the north of England. But this was happening during the reign of Queen Elizabeth. Not the Queen Elizabeth who just died this year, but the first Queen Elizabeth. Do you know have you heard of the first Queen Elizabeth? Yeah. You know of her. And perhaps, have any of you been to Parham House? Do any of you know some of you know Parham House. That was built during the reign of Queen Elizabeth. And she was the daughter of Henry VIII. And some of you may know Henry VIII because he had 6 wives. Have you heard of Henry VIII and his 6 wives? And he wasn't really a good guy, really. He was, yes.
Was he the son or grandson of Queen?
Queen Victoria. No, he was. Henry VIII was the son of Henry VII, which helps us remember. Yeah, a long time before Queen Victoria. So that's a long time ago. That is in the 1500s, and that's 200 years before there was any industry in the north of England, before the Industrial Revolution. So when you walk there now, there were about 100 of these blast furnaces, about 100 of them across northern Sussex. But if you go there today, there's nothing to see. It's all gone, it's all overgrown, the buildings have been pulled down and the material used to build other things. The only thing that survives to tell you that there had been an iron industry are the ponds. Some of the ponds that were created to power the mills are still there. And sometimes on maps they're still called hammer ponds. And the other thing that they made up in the wheel was glass. Now, does anyone know how you make glass? Oh, right, this is good. Someone who hasn't... Yes?
Do you melt sand?
Yes, brilliant. Yes, you melt sand. But it has to be the right type of sand. It has to be clear sand. Otherwise, the glass, you can't see through it. It's dirty glass. And a man called John Carré. Now, John Carré was a Frenchman, and he lived in France, and he made glass. And this is also during the time of Queen Elizabeth, the same time. He made glass in France, but in France there were wars going on, and he didn't feel safe. So he and his family left France, and they came to England, and the Queen gave him special permission to make glass in Sussex. But, she said, we'll only give you permission to make glass in Sussex if you teach the local people how to make it as well. That's the deal. And he said, okay. And a village called Wisborough Green, which you can find on the map, he started to make glass. And here you see some glass workers. And what they're doing is they're breaking down bits of glass because as you said, they'd melt down the sand, but then it needed to be broken down again and melted a second time to get out the impurities, the dirty bits. Because if you don't get rid of the dirty bits, you'll have glass that no one can see through. Well, that's all right if you're making a bottle, but if you're making windows, you want to be able to see through the glass. And there you are. So these people here, they're melting the glass again. And look at all that heat. Lots of heat being used to melt the glass to make the pure glass that could be put in windows. And it was only in Queen Elizabeth's time that people started to have glass in their windows. So before that, windows didn't have any glass in at all. So can you imagine what that was like in the winter? So all you could do, if it was really cold in the winter, all you could do was close the shutters, like little doors on the windows, made of wood. So that would sort of keep you warm, but what would be the downside of that? Yes?
There'd be little gaps.
There could be a gap and the wind would come through, so you'd still get cold, but a bigger problem, yes?
The rain comes down and it soaks it.
If there were no windows here and there were no lights on, we would be in the...
Dark.
Yes. So before glass, when it was cold or wet and people closed the shutters, it would be completely dark. So they'd have to have candles on even in the daytime. So glass made a huge difference. It meant people's houses were much lighter than they had ever been before. But glass was very, very expensive. So only the rich people had windows with glass. The poor people still had to have wooden shutters. Gunpowder. So everyone knows what gunpowder is. A few weeks ago we had a celebration and we let off fireworks. And what are they made out of? Yes?
Gunpowder.
Gunpowder. Now, gunpowder was originally invented in China. Many hundreds. Oh, many hundreds of years ago, and it was in medieval times that gunpowder came to England, and it was used in wars. And if you think of old-fashioned boats in wars, and you think of castles in wars, what did they fire from the boats or from the castles? Yes, cannons. Cannons. And what do they fire out of the cannons? Someone who hasn't answered. Yes, you. What do they fire out of cannons?
Cannonball.
Exactly, cannonballs. And what's a cannonball made out of? Yes.
A huge type of stone.
Well, it could be. And what else is heavy and would do a lot of damage? Yes. Iron, yeah. So the iron industry made cannons, and the iron industry made cannonballs. Yeah.
Didn't Guy Fawkes also use gunpowder to try blow up the Houses of Parliament?
Now you must have foresight. You must know another picture I'm about to show. That's exactly what I'm going to show in 2 slides on. Yep, very good. So gunpowder is a mixture of well, basically, when I was talking about charcoal, it's a mixture of carbon, dark powdered charcoal, sulphur, which is a yellow stone, and if you grind sulphur out, it smells like bad eggs, horrible smell, sulphur, and saltpeter, which is a sort of sand. And if you mix those 3 together, you make gunpowder. But you have to get the mix right, because if you have too much of one and not enough of the other, it won't explode. But if you put too much in, it may explode while you're mixing it up. It's a very dangerous industry, gunpowder. Yes.
I thought gunpowder wasn't real because I play a game will have gunpowder, but
I didn't know that it was real.
It is real, yeah, it is.
I thought it was made up.
No, it's real stuff. It's real stuff. And they made gunpowder in the Sussex Weald. And they were called gunpowder mills, where they mixed it all together. But there was huge amount. Maybe they had... If you would like the whole talk about Sussex Industries to be held at your school, please contact Chris Hare at the email address below.